So this panel is all about meaningful brands driving the new economy. One of the statistics I threw out right at the beginning was that when you ask people, they say that brands being meaningful to them is only half of it is about products and services. The rest of it is actually about how you kind of affect my personal well-being, the well-being of those around me, the economy, society, environment. So that's kind of the conversation that we're going to have today. So I will introduce the esteemed panel that I have here. So I'll start on my left. Catherine Trebeck. Looks far too young to be a professor, but that she is. She's the Senior Advisor on Policy and Campaigns at Oxfam, has been in the driving force behind the Humankind Index developed by Oxfam, and she's travelled all the way from Glasgow, I believe, to be with us today. So thank you, Catherine. To her left is Albert Tucker, who's stewarded a transformational, values-driven global organisation and driven innovation within the whole fair trade space. So Albert changed the marketplace for both coffee and chocolate by pioneering that movement. I think we can all recognise that that's a movement that is almost expected to be everywhere these days and isn't in the foothills, as Peter kind of mentioned earlier. Today, Albert sits on many not-for-profit boards, works to drive sustainable energy for poor communities, and I did mean to bring a bottle of Karma Cola. Albert has one, and has just launched in this market Karma Cola. I won't steal his thunder because he'll explain the kind of story behind it, but there's a very meaningful story behind the cola bean, which is in that bottle, which is no longer in the slightly more well-known, well-stocked versions of Coke that you might find in your supermarket. And last but not least, Karen Hamilton, who's the Global Vice President of Sustainable Business at Unilever. Karen worked in marketing for 20 years and then moved into the sustainable living team within Unilever. So has a unique perspective, both from the marketing angle, but also kind of from a sustainability perspective. And I guess it's worth saying that Unilever is that company, like I talked about at the beginning, that lives this from the top down, from Paul Polman, and is committed to double the size of its business and half the size of its output or its footprint, which is quite some commitment, and I believe they are on track. So, Karen, if you don't mind, we might start with you. Clearly, as one of the biggest manufacturers of consumer packaging in the world and one of the biggest marketers in the world, you've had to kind of work hard at sustainable living, and you've achieved a lot already, but how did you get the buy-in from the leadership, or was the buy-in already there and you've been part of that?
So I guess it's fair to say that we didn't start from point zero as a company. One of our founders, William Lever, right back in the 19th century, developed Sunlight Soap, and the intention behind Sunlight Soap was to address some of the Victorian issues around hygiene and sanitation. And he went on then to produce Lifebuoy Soap, which is one of our biggest soap brands today. And with very much the same vision and ambition in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. So we didn't start from scratch. But I think key, and I think it's true for all big companies, is that it must come from the top. So we had our CEO, Paul Polman, coming into Unilever in 2009, and is very clear that he wanted to rediscover and bring to life, a more powerful purpose for Unilever, which, as you described, we've said that we want to double the size of our business while reducing our environmental footprint and increasing our positive social impact. So that, of course, his championing from the top is crucial. And I guess what what I would say is that the leaders across the company, have come in and opened different doors, if you like, to how they can see a business value from embracing different social, environmental, or economic issues, these bigger issues that the previous panel were really addressing. What I see is, if you like, is sort of the questions in people's mind is, the biggest question is there a business case? Is there a value and a return for me in moving to a sustainable business model?
Very good, thank you. And Albert, when you built Cafe Direct and when you started the fair trade movement and pushed that forward, what were you trying to achieve, and how difficult was that back in those days?
Well, I didn't start the fair trade movement. You know that fair trade was one of the headers on the UN declaration, but it's one of the things they never did. They never got round to. We got around to wars and arms and things, but not fair trade. And I think Cafe Direct came out of a very interesting thing, which was that the Western world decided to take away, as part of the free market initiative, the world coffee price. There was a minimum price for coffee. So they removed that. So coffee producers around the world collapsed. And it would interest you to know that depending on the world market prices, coffee is the second most valuable commodity in the world next to oil. But overwhelmingly, the great majority of people who produce it are poor. So anybody with any sanity would say that can't be right. That is how most useful business start, that there's something to be solved. So fair trade was about sorting that problem out. And it was actually farmers in Mexico who suggested we create a brand. Actually, because even though we worked with them to get them to produce good quality coffee, people didn't know them, they didn't trust them. They didn't buy directly from them. So traders on the ground exploited them. So one of the key elements of fair trade, you hear people talk about the price a lot. But what we did was train people to do good business, to be able to understand the value of their crop. And I want to bring people a little bit into the room, all this move into the urban. As human beings, the thing that fuels us is food and drink. And yet the people who produce it get treated like, in polite company, so I wouldn't use it. Can you imagine doing that in a restaurant, going to a restaurant, ordering food and treating the person who's going to cook your food, who's going to produce your food, like they're not worth anything? Do you know what would come back to you? So, one of the things fair trade has done is to actually get people to understand the value of their product, the value externally, what we pay for it, and also to be able to negotiate. So fair trade, for me, has been about a whole change of the worldview about trade and what it can do. That business is actually there to serve people, not the other way around.
Wonderful. So both of you have, I guess, talked about a similar thing, that good business is better for people. Oliver talked about better for business, better for people, better for the planet. Catherine, as an NGO, Oxfam obviously does a lot of work with government and business. Do you see that trinity is increasingly understanding each other better and working better together towards the goals that have been discussed? Is that something that's starting to happen, or are we still in the foothills?
At its best. And I think there's been a long history of organisations like Unilever and like Albert's Fair Trade working together to try and advance some of the causes that we'd all care about. Mm-hmm. But we're in a situation where we heard with Peter's question that none of us think we're on track for a sustainable planet by 2030, which is terrifying. But beyond sustainability, we're also creating a world that none of us as individuals would actually want. We've got these outcomes of our economic system that are so broken, and they're breaking communities and breaking individuals. And I think the sort of title of this conference around meaningfulness is perhaps the hinge that can actually be at the centre of that trinity, because that's where we can leverage the most impact from brands and companies to actually deliver those sort of outcomes that we need for people and planet to flourish. And when we can have brands acting not just as a pivot point or a lever for change, not just in their sort of instrumental sense, but something much more ambitious than that, as a sort of mechanism to create a coherence between that planet and the sort of communities and the economy that we actually need, where we're not just inputs into the production practice, we're not just factors of production like a pallet of paper, where we're actually treated and cherished for our intrinsic values. And I think that's thinking about meaningfulness, whether it's about the product or about the sort of work we do or about the communities or about the place that we saw so beautifully from Oliver's presentation. That's where actually we can really have sort of this virtuous cycle between that trinity that you talked about. And so that's something that Oxfam's trying to do, is try to actually get that race to the top rather than just waiting for trickle down to happen, because we've been waiting way too long for trickle down to happen.
Quite. So picking up on that point, what are the barriers? What are the challenges? All of you have kind of pioneered in this space, yet it isn't commonplace. Hopefully the fact that we've got so many different people here means that it's increasingly becoming part of the agenda. What are the learnings and the biggest challenges that each of you have seen? Maybe start with you, Karen, if you don't mind.
So for me, I think that the biggest challenge, and it was a surprise to me as having a marketing background myself, but the biggest challenge has been to shift the marketeers in Unilever. What we do global people surveys, we call them, so employee staff surveys every year, and one of the questions we always ask is, well, do you feel that you're able to build sustainability into your day-to-day working life? And what we found is that the marketing community is 20 points behind the rest of the company on the answer to that question. In other words, they're more than often than not, they're saying no, we're not finding ways to build it into to the day-to-day work that we're doing. And I guess they're asking us a couple of questions really. Well, are consumers interested? Is this relevant to my consumers? And then for those who say, well, it is relevant, they then say, well, actually, this isn't the same kind of marketing that I did before. I need to think differently. And, I might have been doing marketing for 10 years, 25 years, but I've kind of got to start again. And that can be quite daunting.
So have you got proof that people care more when you deliver more sustainable products and you change the type of marketing that you do?
Yes.
How do you measure whether that's working?
Yeah, so recently we've started to analyse it in a much more sort of systematic way than ever before. So we said, well, talking a lot about brands with purpose, and I really like the work that Havas is doing on meaningful brands. So I think it's very relevant here. So we're bandying around this word brands with purpose, but without putting any kind of systematic sort of definition behind it. So we've attempted to put some definition behind it. We've said that means a brand has integrated sustainability both into its purpose and into its products. So it's both about how we communicate and talk and engage with consumers and help the people that we're serving to participate actually in something which is making a measurable difference, but also what action we're taking on the ground with our products, whether that's in health, hygiene, nutrition, environmental impact, or the sourcing of the ingredients. So very much to your point, Catherine. And what we've found is some fascinating evidence from the first year. So we look back at, we categorise those brands that we would therefore have said have started to go on that journey. We call them sustainable living brands. And what we're seeing is that sustainable living brands are making up more than half of the company's growth in 2014, and they're growing twice as fast. So it's a correlation, it's not a direct causation, but brands like Dove, Lifebuoy, and Domestos and so on are amongst those sustainable living brands, and we are really starting to see some exciting evidence.
That's compelling evidence. Isn't it?
Yes,
I think compelling evidence.
I think it is, and I think it also is a helpful way for our marketers to sort of structure. Well, how should I go about this? Yeah. And which of the brands in the company, as well as of course brands outside, are doing really well that I can start to follow. Where's the good practice?
Yeah. I think I'm actually quite excited with this. I love being here. It's a future thinking session, and I see a lot of young business people in the room, which is fantastic. That's not usually what I see when I sit on panels like this. And I think that's one of the critical things. I mentor some young entrepreneurs from different communities. I mentor and talk and advise different entrepreneurs coming up. And they're all quite interested in the social impact their business makes. So if you look around at coffee bars now, they're no longer coffee bars. They have bicycle shops next door. They're training young people. There's a non-alcoholic bar in Liverpool, believe it or not, created by a woman who was doing drug recovery, but they had nowhere where they could socialize. So she created one, and it's very successful and being rolled out. So these are the future businesses. And if businesses don't respond to that, I think that's the space that's going to be taken up. And that's partly why I'm talking to these businesses. I've got very excited about the future. Really interested in making a difference through business, more than I've seen for a long time. And equally as well, also like funky designs are part of it, telling the stories. These are all the barriers I think we've had. We like to talk to people about business as a technicality. We found out there's 2 billion colas drunk a day. 3 New Zealanders came and talked to me about where can we get cola nuts from? Does anybody here know what a cola nut is? Does anybody? 2 billion of this stuff is drunk globally every day, and none of us know what gave it its name. Never heard about it, never seen it. The cola nut is a hugely symbolic crop in West Africa. You take it to weddings, funerals, to your future in-laws when you want to show respect, and you offer it. It gave this drink its name. Nowadays, none of those people who grow it make any money out of it because they use artificial flavoring. So we decided to go right back and start with fair trade and organic products. Everything in it is fair trade and organic. And for the cola nuts, we went directly to the people who make it and talked to them about it. So the image on it is the yin and the yang, right? Because it comes from an area where the people believe in a river goddess. So there's a Maori first world influence here because of my New Zealand colleagues who founded the company. And then there's a river spirit called Mamiwata. 6 generations ago, she went to the chief of the village and she told him, she said, if this village is to survive and there's some tough times coming, every chief after you has to be a woman. And they've been ever since. They didn't need a fair equal opportunities policy. Mamiwata changed that. So she's represented here. But that village had gone through 10 years of war. Those people wanted to rebuild. And they wanted to find business ways to do it. They didn't want charity from us. And they had this thing that gave its name to the most drunk product in the world. Yeah. And they have no market. So we thought, well, that's where we go. So we do put some of the proceeds of this towards that village developing itself. They make a decision on how they do it. You know the first thing they wanted us to support? 2 things they wanted us to support right at the start as business people working with them. One was to build a bridge. That flummoxed me, a bridge, you know. But that bridge connected the village and it stopped flooding. And the next was to send girls to school. So being a business person, I said, but you all have children, boys and girls. Why wouldn't you send them to school? They said, well, the way it works is if you're a family, you're tight on your money, you have to send one of your kids to school. It will be the boy, no matter what age he is. So we want you to support bursaries so we can send girls as well. And that's investing in the future. These are people who have got nothing, but they're saying they've just come out of that. And just as we started getting ahead of steam, Ebola hit. So they then said, okay, don't stop this progressive agenda of new stuff, but we need to do some preventative stuff. As I sit here, Ebola has not gone from Sierra Leone, but those guys have organized to make sure there hasn't been an incident in that village. And I think it's because we inspired them. It's not because we did business with them. We're a new business. We only just got into Waitrose last week. But we inspired them that they can do business in a global market. And they were ready for that. And they were ready to use that business to build their own lives. And I think that's what we've got to support as business people. Like, it works, you know. And this stuff tastes great. When you go home, try it. If any of you find that I was wrong, email me and tell me. But I'm telling you, this stuff tastes like cola should taste. And we're running a campaign about Drink No Evil where we tell you all about what's in it, natural sugars, everything else. So, you should know what's in your drink.
So Albert, you've just told quite a few stories there, and stories are essentially the core of kind of communication and marketing. Yeah. Yet it seems that, to your point, marketers are 20 percentage points behind the rest of the organisation. Yeah. Catherine, do you have a view of how we change that and how you use people power internally? Because at the end of the day, businesses are made of people, and everybody, when you tell a story like that, gets touched by it. Yeah. And yet somehow, both in marketing and business, we create faceless corporate brands, and people are increasingly turning away from them in a social age. And we create products and services that do take rather than make, as well as Peter said. So just interested in your view of what it is we're getting wrong.
I mean, people are at the heart of everything that Oxfam does. I mean, to answer one of your earlier questions, do people still care? Oxfam wouldn't be in existence if people didn't. I mean, all the volunteers, all the people that donate to us, you know, even all the staff who choose to give up potentially higher wages, who choose to work for an organisation like Oxfam, it's because they care. Sadly, we also wouldn't be in existence if we eradicated poverty by now. But I'm in no doubt that people still are desperate to connect with other people, to feel that they're doing something tangible and with a purpose. And if you look at any of our campaign reports or any of our websites, any of the campaigns that we're running, whether it's Robin Hood tax or campaign to change the food system, at the front page of that campaign report, on the landing page of that website, will be an individual and a story of a person whose life we're hoping to change through the efforts of that campaign. So those individual stories are our entry point into much more systemic, much more complicated structural issues. And so I think the way that we use stories, I'd like to think it's actually good practice, but Perhaps the evidence is the numbers of people coming behind the campaigns that they're working on suggest that it does work. It's how we connect with each other. We don't connect with some remote amorphous concept or some technical term. We connect with individuals. And if we can make those individuals, whether they're in Sierra Leone or just down the road where poverty exists just as much, then that's how we'll affect change. So I think bringing people to the forefront, not just of the storytelling, but actually at the heart of why we do business, because actually there's no other point. So it's beyond the storytelling, it's why we even go into business, why we get up to do the jobs in the first place.
That's a great point. So in this room, there are brand owners from many different spaces, financial services, telco, auto. Some of them probably thinking, does this apply to my business? Or can this only be done in certain verticals? Every brand has talked about purpose forever. So what's new, and is this something that everyone should and can lean into for any of you, really?
Some of my colleagues are going to shoot me for what I'm about to do, but one of the other things I'm doing at the moment is looking at the energy industry. Another of our favorite ones, our favorite models. But in this country, as we sit at the moment, if people are on prepayment meters, they pay up to 25% more for their energy. And I've tested it. It's a horrible system to manage. You don't know when it's going to go off. You have to go off to a corner shop to pay, to actually load your card after it's gone off. And if it's at night, God help you. And if you've got kids at home, God help you. We're trying to change that. The reason why I'm not supposed to be discussing it is because it's going to be launched soon. And we're going to try and tackle this issue of rising tariffs and people in poverty having to cope with the way tariffs are structured. So we're creating an energy supply business, which will be a social enterprise. Right. And I think it's not about whether I want to go into energy. The purpose thing is sometimes what we forget about, that there's something about that business can resolve or find a solution to that actually also generates profit or surplus or adds to the human experience. And I think Britain has been great at that. The chocolate industry, was created because the Quakers wanted to solve the alcoholism problem amongst the working classes. So the first chocolate product was actually a chocolate drink. Now, it didn't stop the problem of alcohol, but actually created one of the most powerful industries we've got, the chocolate industry. So I think sometimes we think of business in too technical a way. I think that's why you're thinking that.
Yeah, I mean, I think thinking about companies that won't be part of this new agenda, I'd say it's any company that is succumbing to what I call the tyranny of short-termism. Because if we're only focused on the short term, the planet doesn't matter, actually our people don't matter. I used the phrase before, people are just-in-time inventory, but actually if you're thinking long-term, then those people and their well-being and their health and their communities are of fundamental importance, but also the health of your local communities matter as well. So one of the biggest barriers, and again it was one of your earlier questions, Paul, is getting beyond that tyranny of short-termism that pervades too much decision-making. And again, we've seen a great example in Unilever, starting to push back against the way the markets are structured that push us into a very short-termist box and try to say, no, we need to think much more long-term. And actually that will then have multiple beneficial effects.
Very good. Okay, I'm conscious we're running out of time. Could I just ask each of you to just leave the audience with one kind of thought on what you might start to do differently? Or what you might think about leaving this room. I know I didn't particularly prep you for that, so it's very cool. But I'm going to do it anyway.
I'll give it
Karen,
a go.
you're going first. Well done.
So
Thank you.
I think that, so one of the things that I think we've learned, which has been perhaps surprising, is the degree to which working on the sustainability agenda is opening up our business and opening up in quite surprising ways. And that's I suppose, a thought that I would leave. So I'll give you a couple of examples. We do bread and butter for us is consumer understanding, consumer research, focus groups, quantitative surveys, and so on. But what we have always thought about is, for example, thinking about consumers as consuming, as opposed to as people. And we've really tried to shift our research to think a lot more about people in the round. And what matters to people, and what and how we might therefore connect with what's important to them, their values, and their day-to-day lives. The other area which I think we found surprising in terms of connections and partnerships is starting to work with startups. We've just launched a platform called Unilever Foundry Ideas, and it's inviting startups to work with us to find business solutions to some sustainable living problems. And the reason we're doing that is because we believe that we can really gain from that startup mindset and from working together on the actual ideas, finding ways to connect those startups with the right sort of partners so that they can move to scale.
Great advice.
Well, for me, one of the scariest things I've come across in a long time was the question somebody asked earlier, if we think government, if we think we're on schedule to do anything about the cliff we're heading towards. And nobody believes that here. So the one thing I would say to us all here is, that, one, don't believe the hype when they tell you that people don't care. People do. They gravitate towards this stuff because they know they don't want it to be the way it is. So don't believe it in your business. Don't believe the people who work for you believe that, because lots of the people who gave me the best information worked in companies who didn't listen to them. Second, I would say, we are all active citizens. We should act. So if we don't believe enough is being done by those other guys out there, are we doing enough? So the way we shop, the way we run our business, the way we engage with the people, I think we can make a difference. And it may seem really small. I'll just talk about colour farmers, tiny little farmers in West Africa. They're changing their world after war and disease and whatever. All of them would challenge me now to say, actually, that was a bit downbeat. We're looking to the future. We want to go up ahead, and they want business to do that for their communities. So I think we need to think a lot more like that as well, that we can act. It's not a blank page. We can act and start reversing that shift. I'm terrified by the fact that we're all going to be living in urban areas. I want the rural areas to be feeding me still in the future. So let's make sure that survives.
Great, thank you, Albert. And Catherine, finally,
One thing,
not least.
I spend my life writing reports about how complex and multifaceted it is, so it's very challenging to think of one thing, but I'd say actually work less. And it's not just trying to be popular amongst you all, but stop working.
No one's going to disagree with that
Stop
one,
working so hard, because we're in this sort of frenzied economy where we're all working way beyond actually what we need to, whether it's because people are on low incomes and they're not being supported enough, so they need multiple jobs just to make ends meet, or if it's at the higher end of the income spectrum where we're working too many hours to buy stuff for our kids because we're feeling guilty that we're working too many hours, and then that hedonic treadmill just speeds up and up and up, and our stress levels go up. We heard earlier on some of the really staggering statistics about levels of stress, but also the consumption orientation of our lives, that sort of hyper-frenetic work pushes us into the type of consumptions. It's at that highly processed end. Rather than taking the time to make a soup, we're buying it already made and we just need to bung it in the microwave. Much more energy and carbon-intensive way of doing things. So give yourselves a break. Take a day off a week.
Not yet. You can't leave yet, okay? Just to be clear.
Spend it with family and communities, and also
Alcoholics are shaking already.
No. But then also enable other people who desperately need jobs to get those jobs, because there's plenty of work that needs done in our communities, just not enough jobs. So sharing work amongst ourselves.
Excellent. So be more human, think more human. I mean, humans, we are social beings, as we've said. So an excellent, very thought-provoking panel. Unfortunately, we haven't got any time to carry on. So thank you to Karen, to Albert and to Catherine. Hopefully they'll be around later if you want to have a chat. So give them a round of applause.